Dr. Jordan Taylor. Welcome to another edition of Fitness Facts. Today's episode, we are talking about shrinking those adipocytes, fat cells, right? And top tips for losing body fat. So you notice the word shrink there because when you lose body fat, the fat cells actually do shrink, right? Remember, fat cells, I've talked about this in a previous video, they're comprised of mainly a triglyceride pool, so stored triglyceride. And when you burn fat or you lose fat, the cells literally shrink, okay? And also remember, it's a common myth that fat can get converted to muscle or muscle can get converted to fat. No, that is not true. You do not convert fat to muscle or muscle to fat. They're two different types of tissues. Structurally, they're not anything alike. So just remember that. All right, so let's discuss where body fat is typically stored before we discuss how to lose it. So this picture here and this slide just shows that, we kind of distribute body fat differently between the sexes, okay? So males, typically tend to gain weight around the abdomen, right? And a lot of this is genetically controlled. It's hormones influence how we distribute body fat. Now, I want to say that, some males and some individuals, some of the fat is stored subcutaneously around the abdomen, right? So if we have fat that's stored subcutaneously, that means under the dermis of the skin, in adipocytes. That's not as big of a deal as far as health risk as when you get fat stored inside the abdominal cavity in and around your vital organs like your liver, okay? That's called ectopic fat accumulation. That intra-abdominal fat inside the abdominal cavity behind the abdominal wall, that's what we don't want, okay? So that's associated with increased health risk, things like insulin resistance, which can lead to diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and high blood pressure. All right, gynoid or gluteofemoral obesity, this pattern of fat gain is more common in females. So typically, females distribute fat a little differently, more around the hips, the thighs, also the back of the arm. I remember when I was a trainer, I used to have a lady that would come in every day and she was like, I'm tired of waving twice at everybody. I wave here and I wave back here. I don't want to wave twice anymore. And I kind of laughed and said, yeah, that's an area, the arms and female fat distribution pattern, right? And obviously, a lot of my female clients would want to lose the fat around the hips, inner thighs, things like that. So just differences in body fat distribution. Typically, if fat is distributed further away from the vital organs, that's healthier, right? So this gluteofemoral obesity or gynoid obesity fat distribution pattern tend to be at less of a risk for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, those other conditions that you see with central obesity and central adiposity. Now, the interesting thing is when you females hit menopause, prior to menopause, you tend to have a fat distribution like what's shown in the picture here, right? Fat is deposited around the hips, thighs, legs, lower body. After menopause, as estrogen levels drop, hormones change. Unfortunately, now you tend to start depositing more fat around the abdomen, okay? And this is also a time after menopause when in women you start to see cardiovascular disease rates and heart attacks go up, and they start to kind of parallel what you see in men as far as heart attack risk and things like that. Prior to menopause, you look at prevalence of heart attack and cardiovascular disease, it's lower in women, and then you see this increase after menopause, okay? So again, it's kind of interesting how the fat distribution patterns change. All right. Obviously, you want to shrink your fat cells, you want to lose fat. Number one, you have to create a caloric deficit. Okay, there's just no way around the laws of thermodynamics. Okay, you've got to create a deficit. I've talked about it in a previous video. There's equations. You can keep food logs, figure your average daily intake. You've got to figure your total daily energy expenditure somehow. Okay, so total daily energy expenditure, we're talking about the calories needed each day just to maintain weight. Calories in matching calories out. Okay, now, there's many equations. In a previous video, I showed the Harris-Benedict equation. This helps you figure your basal metabolic rate. That's the amount of calories that are needed each day just to keep basically your vital organs and all the automatic processes going on in your body. Then you have to multiply that by an activity factor based on how active you are each day to get your total daily energy expenditure. There's other equations that figure this, like the Mifflin-St. Jean calculator, which can be found on online websites to calculate your TDEE. Katch-McArdle equation, this is another equation to figure your total daily energy expenditure. This equation, along with the Mueller equation, they incorporate, you need to know your lean body mass, right? So your lean tissue mass, to plug that into these equations. So for instance, if you had your body fat percentage measured, you could subtract that body fat percentage. Let's say you get your body fat percentage measured and you're at 15%. You would subtract that from 100%. You've got 85% lean tissue, right? And so that's figured into those equations, your lean tissue. Because again, if you have more lean tissue, you tend to have a higher resting metabolic rate or basal metabolic rate than somebody with less lean tissue. Food logs, right? Again, figuring your average daily caloric intake over several days. And then, if you're wanting to lose weight, you would subtract 250 to 500 calories each day to create a slight to moderate caloric deficit. That's for most individuals. If you're overweight or really obese, you can create a larger deficit safely, okay? So if you are obese, 500 to 750 calories, reducing your daily caloric intake by that much, that's still going to be healthy and okay. And that's going to help create a deficit that will support 1 to 2 pounds of weight loss per week. All right, when you're in a caloric deficit, it's very important that you resistance train. That's critical for maintaining or even increasing muscle mass when you're in a caloric deficit. People that have never resistance trained before, or people that are obese and have a lot of weight to lose, they can increase muscle mass even if they're eating in a deficit. People that have trained for a long time and they go into a deficit, it may be a little harder to increase muscle mass. But anyway, it's important when you're in a deficit, do your resistance training, okay? And that's going to help hold on to that lean tissue so that most of the weight you're losing is coming from fat and not muscle, okay? Stay in the deficit for only 3 to 4 months at a time. Okay, you don't want to just stay in a caloric deficit for years on end. I mean, just psychologically, that can get just brutal. Okay, so do periods 3 to 4 months at a time. If you're overweight or obese, maybe even longer, 6 months at a time where you're in a deficit. And then increase your calories back up to match your total daily energy expenditure. So calories in equal calories out, and you just kind of maintain weight. And so you're in a maintenance phase. Then after several months of being in that maintenance phase, maybe you can go 3 or 4 months where you go in a deficit, right? Or maybe you decide, well, I really want to try to build some muscle. So you start eating more calories a day, 250 to 500 to create a slight surplus because you're really trying to bulk up. So again, whenever you kind of go into these phases, it's hard to maintain a deficit for extended periods of time, okay? This is very general. In general, weight loss diets need to provide minimum range of 1,200 to 1,500 calories per day for women and 1,500 to 1,800 calories per day for men, okay? So if you're trying to induce weight loss, if you're somewhere within those ranges, that can be beneficial, okay? For most people, right? It's not completely accurate. It's a rough estimate, okay? All right, so let's determine next, now that you know you've got to be in a caloric deficit, what type of, quote, diet should you follow? A lot of ways to eat, right? I wouldn't say there's any magical diet out there. Um, you know, let's talk about some of these, and then I'll give my opinion behind these different ways of eating. I don't even know if I like the word diet, pattern of eating, but we'll use diet. There's high fat, low carb, or like a keto diet. Okay, so if we look at the macronutrient percentages in the breakdown, on a high fat, low carb, like ketogenic diet, 75% of your total daily calories are coming from fat, so it's very high fat. 20% of the daily calories coming from protein, 5% from carbs, so very low carb. I mean, typically people are eating, maybe 20, 30 grams of carbs a day on this, very low. All right, what's a low fat, high carb diet? Well, it might be 65% carbs, 25% protein, and 10% of your daily calories coming from fat. So it's basically the opposite of keto. Paleo, what is that? So this is a type of diet where the one thing I do like about paleo, and I've actually done this before and I felt great on it, just really good. You're avoiding processed foods. Anybody can agree on that. Physicians, if you're in the general public, you probably know to avoid highly processed foods. Scientists, we can all agree on that. So paleo does a good job of that. It emphasizes eating more vegetables and fruits. We can all agree on that. More nuts and seeds, yeah, those are healthy. Eggs and lean meats, all right? So not too much of an issue there. If you look at the breakdown, it is a little lower in carbohydrate because you're avoiding, processed carbs, starches, grains, things like that. Moderate protein and a little higher in fat is kind of the breakdown there. Vegetarian, okay, so here you're only eating plant foods, right? So your vegetables, your fruits, you're avoiding animal products. One thing with vegetarians, you really have to know how to mix and match your foods so that you are not lacking any essential amino acids. Also, you have to be careful that you don't suffer any vitamin deficiencies, like vitamin B12 deficiency is common in vegetarians, so it's pretty restrictive. Then there's the carnivore diet. This has become very popular recently, where you're just total opposite of vegetarian. You're eating nothing but animal products. So meat, fish, dairy, organ meats, liver. I mean, it's nothing but animal products, okay? Now let's talk about the typical Western diet. This is what you typically want to avoid this. Our typical Western diet is high in carbohydrate, high in fat, high in calories, which just creates a recipe for diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and certain cancers that are linked to obesity, like colorectal cancer, breast cancer. I mean, there's a variety of cancers that are linked to being overweight and obese. And unfortunately, right now, 70% of our population in America is overweight or obese. I mean, that's almost 3 out of 4 people. So it's a real struggle with our diet and just excess. Also, there's lots of processed food in our typical American Western diet. So a lot of sugar, a lot of high fructose corn syrup. Fructose is a simple sugar that the liver tends to convert to fat and triglyceride. So again, just some issues there. What about a mixed diet, right? So, it's recommended, the dietary reference intakes guidelines to eat 45 to 65% of your daily calories as carbs. I think 65% of the total daily calories coming from carbs is too much for most Americans, even if you're, especially if you're sedentary, right? Now, maybe if you're an athlete and you're training, yeah, you can eat 65% of your daily calories from carbohydrate. You can use that as fuel. You need it to fuel your active muscles. But most Americans could do better to lower their carbohydrate intake. It's going to help with, blood glucose levels, things like that. I think most Americans could bump up their higher protein intake. And then, you see on a mixed diet there, fat being 20, 25%, 15%, somewhere in that range. You don't want your fat to get below 15% because, again, some fat is essential, right? We need it for, I've talked about this in a previous video, but fats for hormone production, for forming cell membranes, for insulation, for energy storage. So we need some level of fat. So you don't really want to drop that below 15, 10% somewhere typically. So with all those diets that I just talked about, find a quote diet or eating pattern that is easy for you to adhere to long term, right? I have this in bold for a reason because dietary adherence, that is the main factor for long-term fat loss, right? The problem with a lot of these kind of extreme diets, like a high-fat, low-carb, keto, or you go paleo for a while, or you do this diet or that diet, whatever it is. Yeah, you'll be able to maintain it for several months, and then you just get tired of being restricted from eating certain foods. So you start kind of craving those foods. Then you completely fall off the diet you were on, your body super compensates, and you tend to regain the weight you lost, plus even more on top of it. Okay, so my advice is, again, you've got to maintain a caloric deficit, but how you do that and what diet you follow, you need to follow the pattern of eating that allows you to consistently stick to that pattern of eating day in and day out over the long haul, okay? And a lot of these more restrictive diets, like say a high-fat, low-carb, even vegetarian, there's a greater chance of nutritional deficiencies, right? So, I would say, in my opinion, a more mixed diet where you're getting, some carbs, and most Americans could lower them. You're getting carbs, you're getting essential amounts of fat, keep that protein up no matter what. That's going to be best and adequate for most people, that mixed diet, okay? And like I said, you don't have to cut out a bunch of foods. You don't have to totally restrict yourself, not have a bowl of ice cream here, a couple cookies there. It's just about moderation, right? Eat it in moderation. No matter what, do keep your protein intake high. Part of this is protein is very satiating, right? When it hits your gastrointestinal tract, it's a lot of work for your body to metabolize protein, and it leaves you feeling full for longer. Plus, there's a greater thermic effect of food with digesting, absorbing protein. There's a greater tax. You actually burn more calories to digest and absorb protein than, say, carbs or fat. Okay, those are digested easier, absorbed easier. It doesn't cost your body as much energy to digest and absorb carbs and fat as it does protein. Okay, so it's two reasons to keep your protein intake high. Plus, of course, it's going to help maintain muscle if you're in a deficit and you're doing your resistance training. You want to maintain that muscle and not lose fat, or not lose the muscle when you're trying to lose fat in a deficit. Okay, so again, what's a guideline for your protein intake? Typically about 1 gram of protein should be consumed for every pound of body weight. So for instance, me, I weigh 170, 175 pounds. I would need 170 to 175 grams of protein per day, okay? Now, you can safely go higher than this. It used to be that they thought, if you went up above 4 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day, that might cause some issues with the kidneys. No, as long as you have healthy kidneys, your kidney function's fine, you could easily go up to 2, 3, 4 grams of protein per pound of body weight per day. Now, of course, as you go up in protein intake, you're going to have to adjust those other macronutrients to stay in a deficit. So you either have to lower your carbs or lower your fat, because no matter how you do your percentages of daily macronutrient intake, you got to stay in that slight caloric deficit to lose weight, hopefully in the form of fat. Another thing you can do is eat plenty of fiber. So it's recommended you get 25 to 30 grams of fiber per day. Where do you get fiber? Well, things like oatmeal, plenty of vegetables and whole fruits. Fiber helps you feel full for longer. It also decreases the rate that you absorb glucose and sugar from the GI tract into the bloodstream. So it can help stabilize your blood sugar levels so you don't get big spikes in blood sugar. It also, soluble fiber can bind up cholesterol and help kind of keep your blood cholesterol levels within normal ranges. So fiber intake's important. It's also going to help you poop, right? And who wants to be constipated? All right, let's look at this chart here. So you see there I have in bold, eat foods that are high on the satiety index. These are foods that are going to help you feel full for longer, right? So I have in red there circled proteins. So Fish, red meat. I do encourage you to eat some red meat each week because some of the fat that's in red meat is going to be used to produce hormones in the body, get good source of protein. And again, protein, once it enters the GI tract, is going to signal the brain that you're full. It's going to give you that feeling of being satisfied, so satiety. For instance, one of the things I see at breakfast, a lot of people, you think about it, what do we eat at breakfast? A lot of people, it's a bagel or some toast or donuts, or it's a lot of carbohydrate at breakfast. I encourage people, one of the adjustments they can make initially in their diet, eat a high protein breakfast, right? It's going to eggs, some meat, maybe it's turkey, bacon, whatever. Eat a high protein breakfast, and that's going to leave you feeling full for longer and more satisfied. Okay. You look at some other things on here that are really high. Potatoes sticks out. I have potatoes underlined. Of course, they're a starchy carb, but it's interesting. Potatoes are really high on the satiety index, so they can help keep you feeling full for longer, so you're not as apt to be, eating every few hours, right? So you think of a typical breakfast, for instance, somebody has a bowl of cereal, right? Refined processed cereal, and then an hour and a half later, they're hungry, right? That's because it's low on the satiety index, right? And look at some of the other hyper-palatable foods, refined carbs and fats down at the very bottom. Your croissants, cakes, donuts, chips, you think about, you eat these, and an hour and a half later, you're hungry again, right? They don't leave you feeling full, like high-protein foods. You see potatoes there, foods that are high in fiber, vegetables, fruits, those are also, they tend to be lower and less energy dense, okay? So that can help you with maintaining or staying underweight in that deficit. All right, so again, looking here, with helping you determine, how to eat or what type of diet to follow. This is recommended by the USDA. I remember back when I was in undergrad and working on my Bachelor's of Science and Exercise Science degree, in the late 90s and early 2000s, we had the food guide pyramid. And at the base of that pyramid, it was recommended, meaning the base of your diet, to eat 6 to 11 servings of carbohydrates per day. So, your pasta, your breads, your grains. And that is a lot to eat. Like I said, most Americans, they would fare well to reduce their carbohydrate intake. If you think back to 50s, 60s, and 70s, there was a study published in it was either 70 or 71 by Ansel Keys. He studied, it was called the 7 Country Study. So he studied the diets of people in like Italy and Greece and Japan and various countries. There were some issues with the study though, because some countries were excluded in the final published study that didn't quite fit, I think, the agenda of that study. But he suggested, we see higher rates of cardiovascular disease in countries where they eat a higher fat diet. Okay, problem was there were some countries excluded where they actually had higher fat intake but lower cardiovascular disease rates. And, what happened is, physicians ran with that study and they said, okay, people need to avoid, saturated fat and cholesterol and eating fat. So what did people do? Well, they avoided eating that in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. What did they replace it with? A bunch of carbohydrate, okay? And now you move into the 90s, the 2000s. Like I mentioned, obesity, overweight, 70% of people, I think I mentioned this in a previous video, 70% of people are overweight or obese. A lot of people have replaced fat intake with carbohydrate, and we still have the same issues, right? Obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. So again, I think most Americans would fare well to lower carbohydrate intake, lower fat intake, keep protein intake higher, right? If you are going to eat a lot of carbohydrate, keep your fat low. If you're going to eat more fat, drop your carbs. No matter what, keep protein high. But this plate here, it's a good general guideline. I mean, plenty of vegetables on the plate. So it's just basically the USDA telling you if you sit down and have a plate in front of you, this is what it should look like. Good chunk of vegetables there, about a quarter of it whole fruit, quarter of it protein, and then a good chunk of it is as grains and carbohydrate. Like I said, I for most Americans, I would change that a little bit and reduce the grains and the carbohydrate and bump up the protein. But this is a good general guideline. Now, for athletes, those that exercise intensely, they can eat more carbs. Why? Because they're not sitting around all day, and carbs are a primary fuel source, especially during high-intensity exercise or, for endurance athletes, right? You store carbohydrate as glycogen in your muscle. You store a backup supply in your liver to keep your blood sugar levels up. Carbs are important for athletes. So they can get by. They can get by with higher carbohydrate intake, anywhere from 5 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight for athletes, okay? All right. And I guess I should mention, and the reason I say, lowering carbs for sedentary individuals is because you're not burning through them, right? If you have an office job, you go home, you're sitting around, you're not burning through carbohydrates like an athlete, okay? So you may be more apt to, if you're not burning them, maybe store some of them as fat, or because you're in a caloric surplus, you're not burning fuel sources, you're in a storage mode, okay? So goals. What should your goals be here for fat loss and shrinking those fat cells? Aim for losing 1/2 to 2 pounds per week. That's safe weight loss. Aim for 5 to 10% of your body weight being lost, with most of it coming from fat within 6 months. Be patient with your diet and your caloric deficit, right? If you figure, that your total daily energy expenditure is 2,500 calories, again, don't sit there and say, well, I'm going to lose weight fast. I'm going to reduce my intake by 1,000 calories a day. That's a big deficit, and you're going to struggle to maintain that, and you may start to have some deficiencies, nutrient deficiencies. So just create slight deficits, and that slight deficit each day is going to add up over the days, weeks, and months, okay? So be patient. I know we all want things to happen now, but it took time to put all that weight on. It's going to take time to get it off, okay? So gradual weight loss should be your goal. And it's easier to maintain than, you lose weight real rapidly and then you tend to go back to your old ways of eating and it all comes back on plus more. So with weight loss, typically what you see in the first week, it's going to be a lot of water weight loss, especially if you're doing a lower carbohydrate diet. Because again, you store carbohydrate as glycogen in your muscle cells. Humans can typically store around 400 to 500 grams of glycogen in their muscle, another 100 to 120 grams of glycogen in the liver. If you reduce your carbohydrate intake, you're going to start reducing that stored carbohydrate, that stored glycogen in your muscle cells, and for every gram of glycogen that's stored in your muscle, there's 3 grams of water. So as your muscle glycogen stores drop, your water that's in your muscle, you're going to lose water as well, because glycogen is like a magnet that holds on to water in your muscle. So as you lose glycogen stores, as they deplete, you also lose water. A lot of times people get really excited on a low-carb diet that first week. So, oh my gosh, I lost 5 pounds or 8 pounds. A lot of that's going to be water on a low-carb diet. Now, eventually, you're going to start losing body fat if you're in a deficit, no matter what diet you're on. But a lot of times, water weight the first week. After a month of being in a deficit, you're going to start to see some noticeable changes to your body. Clothes fitting better. Oh man, you may need a belt. Pants are fitting looser. 3 to 4 months, significant changes can be observed in your body composition. Okay, so again, be patient. All right, now getting into exercise and the role it plays when you're trying to lose fat. So again, when you're in a deficit, resistance exercise is important for maintaining muscle mass. So let's just look at, or even growing it. Standard criteria, I think these are some good general guidelines. Lift a load that's between 67% to 87% of your 1 repetition max, which is the absolute heaviest load you could lift one time. So you find a load that you can do, a weight that's about 67 to 87% of that. which is generally going to be a load that you can lift somewhere between 5 to 12 times, all right? Do 2 to 12 sets per major muscle group. That's a big range because, if you've never resistance trained before, you'd want to start on the lower end, maybe 2 to 3 sets per muscle group. If you're somebody that does a lot of training, right, you're well trained, you probably need to do 10 or 12 sets per muscle group each session, okay? 2 to 4 minute rest period between each set. There's a wide range here as far as how many days a week you should perform it. So 2 to 6 days per week, we'll talk about that. And what are the goals? Obviously improve muscle endurance and strength and preserve your lean tissue, your muscle mass when you're losing weight. A lot of people, if they try to go into a deficit, and let's say they just do cardio, after 3 or 4 months of doing cardio, eating less each day, they'll say, man, I just feel like I'm skinny fat. What they mean by that is, yeah, they're thinner, they look thinner, but they've lost a lot of muscle with the fat because they didn't do any resistance training to stimulate the muscle to stay there, right? So again, it's important including the resistance training in with your caloric deficit, okay? Cardiovascular exercise, what are recommendations here? If you're in a deficit and you're resistance training, you don't even have to do cardiovascular exercise to lose weight. Now, I'm not recommending that you avoid cardiovascular exercise because it's great for your heart and your cardiovascular system. But again, it's not necessarily required to lose weight, right? You get into deficit, you're going to lose fat. In a caloric deficit, the resistance training is going to help you maintain muscle. Your body composition is going to change. But if you want to get a little extra caloric expenditure throughout the week, cardio is a much better mode of exercise than resistance training to burn through calories. Why is that? Well, it's because cardiovascular exercise, whether it's walking, jogging, you're on an elliptical, you're swimming, you're continuously moving. And so you're going to expend more calories in, say, 30 minutes or an hour of cardio than what you would do if you did 30 minutes or an hour of weight training because there's rest periods in between sets, things like that, okay? So cardio is a great way to expend some extra calories, but really diet and reducing caloric intake is going to be even more important than cardio, which I'll talk more about in a bit. But look at the frequency here. You want to shoot for 2 to 7 days a week. This is going to vary depending on how many resistance training sessions you do in the week, okay? And I'm going to have a chart coming up where I explain this. The intensity of cardio should vary with the duration of your workout. If you're doing longer duration workout sessions, like say 60 minutes, then you want to do lower intensity cardio, like a walk that you can maintain, a slow jog for that 60-minute duration. If you're doing short duration sessions, like maybe you have a lunch break, and like, man, I can get in a quick 20 or 30-minute workout. Well, do a high-intensity workout, okay? Really trying to burn calories at a rapid rate in a condensed period of time. Now the duration, again, that can vary. 20 minutes to 60 minutes a day. Some of this varies because of what intensity you're exercising at. It also can vary depending on how fit you are, right? If your aerobic fitness level is really high, you're going to be able to do cardio for longer. If you haven't walked or jogged in years, well, you're going to want to start at the lower end of that minute range per day, okay? Eventually, you can progress over time up to 60 minutes or more. Do realize, though, if you're eating in a deficit and you're losing body fat, too much cardio, if you're doing too much per day, may actually start to promote some muscle mass loss when you're in that deficit, okay? So let's look at some example exercise plans and how this all ties into eating in a deficit. So you notice here, this is an example for a sedentary person. So, if this was a client and I was a trainer, they're coming to me and saying, hey, I've been inactive for years, I haven't been doing anything, I need a plan to help me lose fat, okay, shrink my fat cells. So, we don't want to have them training with resistance training 5-6 days a week. That's going to be a lot for their body initially. So we set them up here doing 2 full body workouts with 72 hours rest in between on a Monday and a Thursday. So we're just going to select one exercise for each muscle group and do 2 to 3 sets per muscle group. So full body on Monday, they're going to do an exercise for the chest, an exercise for the upper back muscles, exercise for the biceps, triceps, and exercise for the legs and the abs. Just 2 or 3 sets, though, for each muscle group. Then Thursday, do another full body workout, same parameters there. Then we look at cardio in the bottom row. We're going to do the cardio on those days they're not resistance training. So a low intensity cardio session for 20 to 30 minutes. It might be just a walk. Then the same thing Wednesday, 20 to 30 minutes, right? We've got to get their aerobic fitness level up and build a fitness base. I'm not going to have them go out and do high intensity interval training if they've been sitting on the couch, they've had an office job, they haven't been active for 5 years. So low intensity, short duration, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for cardio. All right, let's look at somebody that's intermediately trained, kind of like a moderately active person. They've been exercising continuously for, say, consistently for 8 months to a year. Well, now, they've been training for a while, we can add in a few more days of resistance training, bump the frequency up a bit, and we can do what's called a split routine here. So you'll notice on Mondays and Thursdays, they're going to do upper body resistance training exercises. We also bumped up the number of exercises. So they'll do 2 exercises per muscle group. So maybe they do a chest press and a chest fly. For chest, that's their 2 exercises, 4 to 6 sets for that muscle group. Then for the back, they do some rows and a lat pull down, or that's their 2 exercises. They do 4 to 6 sets for the upper back. Again, you see the pattern here. Tricep, maybe it's a rope press down, some overhead tricep extensions, and they're doing a total of 4 to 6 sets for that muscle group, okay? Then on Tuesdays and Fridays, it's lower body work. So no upper body work, just lower body on Tuesday and Friday. Again, pick 2 resistance training exercises for each muscle group and do in between 4 to 6 sets total for each muscle group. So for the quads, the hamstrings, the calves, etc. Then if we look at cardio, you'll notice I've cut down and cut back the frequency of cardio here because they're doing more resistance training sessions. And again, I don't want to do too much cardio on top of the resistance training to where they would start to lose muscle mass. They're already eating in a deficit. So you can see they're doing some cardio on Wednesday. I do have them do a high intensity session that day. So maybe they're doing some interval training, run at a high intensity for 2 to 3 minutes, then maybe walk for 2 to 3 minutes, and then repeat those intervals. Do that for 20 minutes. The weekend, recovering from the week exercise, it's a little more low intensity. So maybe it's a light, low intensity walk or jog for 30 to 60 minutes on Saturday. You take the dog on a walk for 30 minutes Sunday. There's your cardio. Now let's look at an advanced trainee or very active person, somebody that's been exercising consistently every week for more than a year. Well, to keep them progressing and developing muscle and making progress, we bump the resistance training frequency up more here, okay? So they're now doing resistance training 6 days a week with a break, no training on Thursday. Now we have to divide up the volume more throughout the week here and the muscle groups and what we're doing each day. So on Monday, they do what's called an upper body push day. This should be familiar to many of you, this push, pull, lower body routine. So on Monday, it's all the muscles of the upper body that are involved in pushing, military press, right? Bench press, incline press. So it's working the chest, the shoulders, and the triceps. Those are all your pushing muscles, right? So we're going to pick 3 exercises for each of those muscle groups, and we've bumped up the volume here, so 7 to 12 sets per muscle, right? They're more trained, need more of a stimulus to keep gaining muscle and keep progressing. Then on Tuesday, it's an upper body pull day. So this is working the back muscles, right? They're involved in pulling, like rowing or doing a pull-up, and also the bicep. It's a pulling muscle because it causes elbow flexion. So we pick 3 exercises for the bicep, 3 exercises for the back, and we do 7 to 12 sets for the bicep, 7 to 12 sets for the back. So again, high volume, but they're trained. They can handle the higher volume because they're not a newbie. They're not somebody that's just starting to train. Wednesday's lower body. Okay, so 3 exercises and 7 to 12 sets per muscle group. All right, then Thursday a break, and then again, Friday, Saturday, Sunday is a repeat. So basically, you're going to be hitting every muscle group twice a week. Okay, here, chest twice a week, back twice a week, legs twice a week, with adequate rest periods in between. Now you see, because we're doing 6 days a week of resistance training, we've dropped the cardio down quite a bit to just twice a week. And they're both low intensity sessions after those upper body push workouts on Monday and Friday. So I didn't put them after legs because you're going to be exhausted after a heavy leg workout. They're after those upper body push days, just, walking, cruising on the treadmill, maybe on the elliptical for 30 to 60 minutes. Again, because we're doing so much resistance training, I don't want to have too much cardio in to where they may start potentially losing some muscle mass in addition to they're already eating in a deficit, okay? Other tips. What about intermittent fasting? We hear about this a lot. People ask me a lot about intermittent fasting. Hey, if this works for you, do it. I'm fine with it. Again, find a way of eating, an approach to eating that you can stick with and adhere to long term. There are some caveats to this though, but let's first define what intermittent fasting is. This is where you eat in an 8-hour window, and you fast for 16 hours. So, the time that you eat in is condensed. Okay, now, like I said, this is a viable option for losing body fat, but it may pose some issues for building muscle, because for building muscle, the way your body synthesizes protein, it's good to spread out your protein intake across multiple meals throughout the day, so you get spikes, a spike in muscle protein synthesis in the morning, and then maybe you have a snack, and then at lunch, and then a healthy mid-afternoon snack, and then at dinner. So you're spreading protein out, 25 to 40 grams each time you eat. That can help with building muscle and maintaining it when you're in a deficit, where, if you're fasting for 16 hours, you're not going to be synthesizing, or your protein synthesis rate may be reduced because you're only eating in an 8-hour window, right? So you're not spreading out that protein intake across the day, all right? But it can be a viable option for fat loss. Some people like it. It works for them. If it works for you, it works for me. Also, when you eat slowly, savor your food, enjoy it by eating slowly. This allows some of those hormones released from the gastrointestinal tract to signal the hypothalamus in the brain that you're full, okay, so that you don't overeat. A lot of times you'll overeat if you're scarfing down your food and you're eating like had a buddy that was in the Marine Corps, and he ate so fast. It's like, oh my gosh, slow down. Eat more of the foods that are lower in energy density. So things like vegetables, fruits, right? There's not as many calories in vegetables and fruit. All right, so it's easier to stay in a deficit by eating those. And plus, a lot of times they have fiber, and it helps you feel full. Eat smaller portions, more frequent meals throughout the day, unless, of course, you're doing intermittent fasting. Just to give you an idea, I think most Americans, we've lost track of what a portion size is. So I won't go through all of these, but this kind of illustrates it nicely. What's a serving of meat? That's actually about the size of a deck of cards. You can see the calories listed there. What's a serving of oil, butter, or margarine? That's about the size of a single die. What's a serving of carbohydrate, cereal or rice? It's about the size of your fist. Okay, etc. I mean, you just go down the list. You go to any restaurant now, the portion sizes are huge, right? Nothing like what's shown on this chart. So again, I think this should help you focus in on what a portion size actually is, okay? All right, so other tips. Again, remember, protein is primary. when you think about your diet, how to go about eating, calculate how much fat and the amount of carbs you should intake after figuring how many grams or how many calories are going to be coming from protein in your diet each day, okay? So if you eat more fat, it's wise to lower your carbohydrate intake. If you eat more carbohydrate, then lower your fat intake. No matter what, keep that protein up, and that's going to do you well. Again, there's some caveats here. I think if you're an athlete, your carbohydrate intake can be higher because that's going to really help fuel you as an athlete during exercise. Again, if you're a sedentary American, you have an office job, you're not very active, I would keep those carbohydrates lower each day. I mean, you don't have to necessarily go no carb, but I wouldn't eat, 65% of your total daily calories coming from carbs a day. Maybe lower them down around 40%. Okay? Because again, typical American diet, it's high in carb, high in fat, right? Remember that 1 gram of fat is 9 calories, so it doesn't take much. I mean, if there's a little bit of fat in a food, there's probably going to be, a lot of calories because it's very energy dense. All right? Remember that abs, right? Six-pack is made in the kitchen, not so much on the treadmill. And what I mean by that is people don't realize how much physical activity, aerobic exercise you actually have to do to burn off calories from the food that you eat. So, typical medium-sized glazed donut, you're looking at about 300 calories there. If you're of average weight, there's a lot of factors here. Say, 150 pounds. Depending on the speed you're running at, your weight, some other factors, you may have to run for about 3 miles at a steady jog to burn off those 300 calories. So you're looking at burning about 100 calories per mile. Right? So think about that. You're like, I'm going to eat a donut, 300 calories, depending on the speed you're running, a bunch of other factors. Again, your weight, muscle mass, your height, your age, hormones, things like that. And typically, kind of a rule of thumb is about 100 calories per mile. So looking at 3 miles to burn that donut off, all right? So that's why it's easier to just stay in a caloric deficit each day by eating less, 250 to 500 calories less per day. Or if you're obese, you could create a larger deficit, 500 to 750 calories a day. Drink plenty of water, okay? A minimum of 8 to 12 cups per day. If you're an athlete, you're going to need more. You can drink as much as you want, really. I mean, sometimes when you feel hungry, you may actually be thirsty. So the reason for that is the hypothalamus not only regulates hunger and satiety, but the thirst control centers are there as well as those hunger control centers. So I always used to recommend to my clients when I was a trainer, if you're feeling hungry, drink a couple glasses of water, then wait 30 to 45 minutes so you get that water absorbed. It's going to get into the bloodstream, circulate around. Then the hypothalamus says, oh, I just thought this person was hungry. I guess they were dehydrated. Now that they're fully hydrated and have plenty of water, some of those hunger pains and that hunger signal may subside. So it might have been the hypothalamus kind of got tricked. It thought you were hungry when really you were just dehydrated and thirsty and needed to drink some water. And therefore, your brain and the hypothalamus registers as you being satisfied, right? So drink the water first, see if you're still hungry. If you are, well, yeah, then maybe you need to go ahead and eat, okay? I mentioned this before, eat a protein-rich breakfast. I think the American breakfast is really high in carbohydrate. I would encourage you to, cook your breakfast. It's hard to do when we're all in a hurry in the morning. I mean, eggs are great in the morning. They can help you feel full for an extended period of time. They're also high in leucine, which leucine is an amino acid that's part of the protein in eggs. That leucine is known to help stimulate a metabolic switch in your cell called mTOR that helps promote muscle protein synthesis. So eggs are great. Get adequate sleep and reduce stress. So getting inadequate levels of sleep and being very stressed out has a huge impact on your hormones. And with some of the hormonal fluctuations that it causes, it can promote weight gain and make it a lot more difficult for your body to be able to burn fat, okay? So for instance, we talk about cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone. You release it from your adrenal gland, which is a gland that sits on top of your kidneys. That cortisol helps keep your blood sugar up. If you're in a fight or flight situation where you needed to have adequate blood sugar to flee or fight your way out of some event, it has other roles. It can actually promote fat loss in the short term, keeps inflammation down, a lot of different roles in the body. But in the long term, if you have chronically elevated cortisol levels, it can actually interfere with insulin signaling, and it tends to lead to abdominal fat deposition and gains in body fat. So in the short term, cortisol can actually help promote fat loss, but long-term elevated cortisol levels actually promote fat gain. So try to keep your stress down. It's hard to do, but again, that has an impact on your hormones. Another thing I recommend, you're like, chew gum, why is that on there? Well, just having the sweet taste of gum in your mouth, sometimes if you're trying to stay in a deficit and curb your cravings, just having that gum and chewing gum, I used to recommend this to clients, can help reduce cravings, okay? Other tips, get up from your desk at work every hour and go for a brief walk, right? This is going to help expend, some calories in that physical activity category, right? So just a short 5-minute walk, right? Plus, you'll probably notice that when you return to your desk, now that you've got that blood flowing and circulating, you may think more clearly and actually be more efficient during that next hour of work. Park further away from the stores in the parking lot. It drives me nuts when I pull into a grocery store or the mall or whatever, and you see the parking lot vultures, the people that are hovering, trying to get the parking spot that's the closest to the store. I'll park wherever I see the first spot. It could be way at the back of the parking lot, get out, and I'll walk by that car that's waiting on the very first parking spot before they even can take it, right? And so I'll be in the building, they're still waiting on a parking spot. Plus, I've expended a little bit of energy to walk from the back of the parking lot into the building. All right, another thing you can do, purchase a pedometer. These devices you can wear, they keep track of your steps. You commonly hear you should try to get 10,000 steps a day. Again, these are just ways to increase energy expenditure throughout the day on top of the calorie deficit that you've created by eating less. Also supplements, okay? So these play a role. Caffeine, a lot of us drink it. It's the most widely abused drug in the world. Caffeine has some beneficial effects, obviously on cognitive function. Pre-workout drinks, many of these contain stimulants. Caffeine and other stimulants in pre-workout drinks can help suppress appetite. Also, caffeine in an effective ergogenic dose has been shown to enhance lipolysis, or the release of fat from fat cells, which is beneficial, right? We want to lose fat so those fat cells shrink. And it's shown that typically you want to consume 3 to 9 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight 60 minutes prior to exercise to get that lipolysis effect, right? So to figure that, remember that 1 kilogram is equal to 2.2 pounds. So to figure my body weight in kilograms, I would take 170 pounds, divide that by 2.2, that'd give me like 77 kilograms, something like that. I would take my kilogram weight of 77 and multiply that by a number that's between 3 to 9 milligrams. So I'll just say 5. That would give me an estimated effective dose of caffeine that I should consume 60 minutes before I exercise, okay? What are the benefits of fat loss? Well, obviously looking better, you're going to feel better, probably feel more energetic. If you're an athlete, you'll be faster, more mobile, flexible, just greater joint range of motion. Again, if you're an athlete, more explosive, you'll be less injury prone. some health benefits over here on the other side. So losing fat is going to help enhance your insulin sensitivity. So again, insulin is an important hormone that helps to shuttle glucose, amino acids, nutrients into our cells. If your cells are resistant to insulin, which is what you see in type 2 diabetes, the skeletal muscle cells, the fat cell, the liver, they don't listen to insulin. Sometimes like when my daughter doesn't want to listen to me. If those cells aren't listening to insulin, insulin's trying to shove nutrients into the cell, especially glucose, sugar. Well, if the cells are resistant to the hormone insulin, that means glucose stays in the bloodstream and it starts to elevate. And if your blood glucose, your blood sugar rises and it stays high, well, you may end up being eventually diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. It's characterized by insulin resistance. But exercise and losing weight actually enhances the skeletal muscle cells, the fat cells, the liver cells. The insulin receptors on those cells are more sensitive to insulin's action. So it's easier for the cells to uptake glucose, uptake amino acids, clear those nutrients from the bloodstream, especially sugar, so you don't have high blood sugar, because high blood sugar over the long haul, it's very damaging to your blood vessels, to the retina in your eye, to your kidney function, right? I mean, it's damaging, right? So again, exercise, weight loss, fat loss, your cells are more sensitive to insulin. That's good. Next, we have lower or improve your blood glucose, which I mentioned is tied into insulin sensitivity. So again, this is another benefit of becoming more insulin sensitive. And just one acute bout of exercise, this is interesting. So you just do one exercise session, your insulin sensitivity will improve, and that's going to help lower that blood sugar. And you can imagine if you start to do this and accumulate workout sessions over the days and weeks and months, that's going to really help to stabilize your blood glucose. And that's why if you're early in the stages of type 2 diabetes and you're insulin resistant, exercise and weight loss can help reverse that insulin resistance, lower your blood sugar levels. It's going to allow those cells to become more insulin sensitive. And you may even be able to reverse your type 2 diabetes, right, through the exercise and weight loss, okay? Now, also decrease blood pressure. Reducing your body weight is a huge factor, really plays the biggest role in getting your blood pressure down, okay? I think it is for every 1 kilogram of weight lost, so 1 kilogram is 2.2 pounds, so for every 2.2 pounds of weight you lose, your blood pressure will usually drop by a point, which is pretty significant, okay? Also, benefits of fat loss and increasing exercise, okay? Exercise can help increase your HDL-C, right? That's that high-density lipoprotein that brings cholesterol back to the liver so it can be metabolized. Exercise and fat loss, you tend to see a decrease in triglyceride levels in the blood. LDL particle size changes. I've talked about LDL in another video. They tend to become larger and you may have a reduced particle number, which helps to reduce your risk of atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease. So again, exercise, fat loss, all this is tied in. Overall, it's going to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, and certain cancers. Now to summarize, last slide. So if you just want the bottom line take-home message, what can you do to lose fat? Keep it simple. Remember these 5 points here. Maintain a slight caloric deficit. 250 to 500 calories per day is going to work for most people. 500 to 700 if you're obese. Select a diet you can adhere to long term. There's many different patterns or ways of eating. They all have pros and cons. There's not one magical diet out there. Pick the one that you can stick with long term. Number 3, Prioritize protein, right? Figure out how much protein you need per day, then adjust your carbohydrate and fat accordingly, right? Generally, if you're going to eat more carbs, keep your fat low. If you're going to eat more fat, keep your carbohydrate lower. Resistance train, okay? You need that when you're in a deficit and losing fat so that you don't lose a bunch of muscle along with the fat you're trying to lose, right? That's going to help provide a stimulus for you to keep the muscle on your body or even grow some. Now, you can throw a little cardio in the mix each week. Like I said, it's not required for losing fat because with the resistance training you're doing and eating in a slight caloric deficit, you are going to lose fat, you're going to lose weight. But throwing in a little bit of cardio, help you expend some extra calories each day, and it's going to be great for your heart, right? So your cardiovascular system will thank you. So I hope you enjoyed this long edition of Fitness Facts and you got something out of it. Hope it can help you out. Again, I'm Dr. Taylor, signing off. See you next time.